Mm. Okay, so let's begin with a pop quiz. Who here has actually heard of the Pitcairn Islands? That's a lot more than I expected, actually. Who's been there? Anyone actually been there? Thought someone was saying so. And who's read or watched Mutiny on the Bounty? A lot of people. Cool. So everyone, welcome to the Pitcairn Islands. It's one of the most beautiful places that I've had the honor of visiting. There's lots of wonderful daytime things to go hiking around and see in addition to their amazing dark skies. This is me showing how much I really enjoyed it. So let me tell you first a little bit about the Pitcairn Islands. It's actually a set of 4 different islands, Owino, Henderson, Ducie, and the not at all confusingly named Pitcairn Island itself. It is roughly, well, almost exactly halfway between South America and New Zealand. And just as a point of trivia, it's about 8,200 kilometers south of Vancouver. And in the winter, we're on the same time zone as they are. They're just almost directly south of us. It is the reason that it's considered to be one of the most remote populated islands on the planet is that it is an adventure just to get there. Because first, you have to get to Tahiti, which is a long trip in and of itself. Then you get to ride one of these neat turboprops, which I'd never seen before, which is a jet plane with a prop on it. So you go to Heo Island, have enough time for a coffee break, fly over to the Gambier Islands, and then the fun really starts. You get to board the Silver Supporter, a small freight ship that you'll spend 2 nights on the open ocean on. And the sky from there is absolutely beautiful. But absolutely, positively, do not forget your motion sickness medicine. Don't. The Pitcairn Islands themselves were originally populated by the Polynesians. That they were there for hundreds of years. And for one reason or another, they disappeared in the 1400s, which is convenient because that means that they were long gone before the British mutineers got there in January of 1790. I did not know before I went on this trip that Mutiny on the Bounty was based on a true story, which is funny because I'd read it before. And today there's almost, but not quite 50 residents there, and almost all of them have a direct descendancy from the mutineers and the original Tahitians that populated the island. The 4 islands are the UK's last remaining Pacific territory. They are the UK's smallest territory, with Pitcairn Island itself being almost, but not quite 5 square kilometers. So not very large. It only takes a couple of days to hike around the whole thing. They have enough room for one whole town. It's called Adamstown, and it's named after the last remaining mutineer. And that, ooh, you can't see it on that. Oh, well, in the middle is you can see the town center. And I got to stay here with a beautiful view of the ocean. I got to wake up to that every day. There's so much more about the Pitcairn Islands, but I will refer you instead to the Wikipedia pages and let you read for yourselves. I highly encourage you to do that. There's so many fun stories of that place and its history. So why did I choose to go there? It started with COVID. Sure, that surprises no one. After 3.5 years of being in downtown Vancouver with this going on and it getting louder and there being more sirens and it just getting dirtier, I had to get the heck out of there. And I decided I wanted to follow the dream that I'd had for a while of going to see with my own eyes the large and small Magellanic Clouds. I wanted to see their photons with my retinas, with no internet in between. What did they really look like? And so that was my motivator. That's what I was going to do to get out of downtown Vancouver. So after doing some research, I found this. Their international dark sky sanctuary, whose name I'm not going to butcher, trying to pronounce it myself, but just use their translation, Eyes to the Sky. It covers all 4 islands, not just one of them. And that makes the dark sky sanctuary itself about the size of 2 Californias. pretty big. So when you're on any one island, the closest artificial light after 10 p.m. is well beyond the horizon. It's because at 10 p.m. they cut off the generators, and so there's no light, just whatever is natural and whatever flashlights you might have on you. But I ran into a problem, or I should say a surprise. Other than the Dark Sky Sanctuary, they have no further offerings for astrotourists. I emailed them inquiring, and they said, we have an old telescope in the old school that you can borrow. I was hoping for a little more than that. And so I use it as an excuse to learn the Southern Hemisphere sky and be my own deep sky astrotourist. And as an extension of that, I figured, well, if I'm going to learn all that, why don't I share? And I'm glad I made that decision. I'd never done that before. And so it was something new to try, because I had no idea how to do it. And so I sent emails to the RASC leadership, both my local branch, Vancouver, and the national level. And on the same day, the then president of the time, Charles Ennis, emailed me back. I was like, oh my God. And so I replied to him just as soon as I regained consciousness. And we started chatting about it. So it is with his and Lorelai's guidance that I was able to plan the rest of the trip. And it was a much better trip with their guidance. They knew plenty of stuff I wouldn't even thought of. So to make a long story short, let's fast forward to the actual event. They wanted to call it Open Telescope Night, which was fairly descriptive. And by this time, I had over a month of planning and learning time that I made use of. So by this time I had my carefully handwritten list of targets in chronological order. I had asked them to bring their own binoculars. I had setting up my own binoculars for them to use if they wanted to. I had their old telescope from their old school, which turned out to be a Dobsonian. They didn't even know. They just, when they replied to me, they said, we have a telescope, and that's what it turned out to be. So they loaned that to me for this, and they also loaned me this gentleman right here, Sidney Gould, one of their residents, and he got to be my lovely assistant for the entire time that I was there. And he was a big help. He helped me every step of the way. And a very nice man. If you go there and get to stay with him, then he's quite the personality. I also had my really cool, bright green laser pointer, which they really loved, but I didn't know at the time you had to be certified first before you use those. I know that now. So if any of y'all want to use laser pointers outside, just go to your favorite web search engine and put in RASC laser pointer, and you'll find out everything that you need to know to become certified and use them properly, like me. And I had my go-to smart telescope, which in this case was a Veyana Vespra. And this was recommended to me by Lorelai during one of our Zoom calls beforehand. And I'm going to pause a moment and talk about smart telescopes. There's lots of astronomers for them, lots of astronomers against them, and they all have valid reasons. In this case, this was outreach. And for the purposes of outreach, this thing stole the show. It has a lot of advantages over the other two scopes that I had set up because I didn't think about they're going to have to walk over uneven ground in the dark to get to these other things, which is probably not the safest. Whereas with this thing, it doesn't even have an eyepiece. It transmits directly to my iPad, which I was able to just pass around and people could see the picture without ever having to get up. And also people new to astronomy don't know where to find the eyepiece on a Dobsonian. That was a common question that I hadn't anticipated. Oops, and that just bypasses that directly. The way that I used it was when I started talking about a target, I would point it out in the sky with a laser pointer. Well, I would program it into the telescope first so I could start looking for it, then start talking about it, pointing it out in the sky with a pointer. And that would give them a chance to try to see it with their naked eye or use their binoculars if they wanted to try to see it through there. And then then after a little bit, the picture would start to form, and then they would get to see the picture get better and better every time the iPad went around. So it was just a wonderful success in that way. So, okay, I had that, and then all we needed was something to look at. And at that time, Venus was at near elongation. So it was the brightest star, the brightest thing in the sky. And so I told them, as soon as Venus shows up, we will start. And I just answered questions until then. And suddenly someone shouted, "There's Venus!" And we all looked at it, and I pointed the binoculars at it, and let the party begin. Sorry. Was pointing everything to them, talking about it. We also happened to be in the middle of a meteor shower, the BOTs. So I was able to tell them, keep an eye out for shooting stars. And I'm glad I did, because they did. Randomly through the event, I would hear them go, when I would turn and look, and they were pointing out to each other where they'd seen a shooting star. I'm like, yes, they're enjoying it. This is great. Mars eventually showed up, and so I was able to use Mars and Venus together to point to the Beehive cluster, and so they might be able to find it, and I pointed my devices towards it. It was still too light for the smart telescope at that point, so it was just the manual telescope and the binoculars at that point. But we talked about that for a little while the sky got darker. It was finally time that I could start pointing out some of the constellations. We could see enough of the stars. Does anybody know, if you can see it, what that is? Okay. Okay. So hundreds and thousands of years before GPSs, a lot of people used this to navigate the southern hemisphere, because of course they don't have a southern pole star like we do in the north. And it's a little unfortunate, because in fact, this is the Southern Cross, not that one. And when I got to see this for myself, the real and the false one side by side, I could really see how they would make that mistake, because the false one is larger and it's really easy to find. I was like, okay, cool, I get that. But then I noticed that immediately to the left of the real Southern Cross is Alpha Centauri, the third brightest star in the sky. And right next to it is Beta Centauri, the 11th brightest star in the sky, and the two together point straight at the real Southern Cross. So at that point, I lost all sympathy for the dum-dums who followed the false one and feel like Darwinism in action was a good thing. So my own personal opinion. Then I was able to point out more of the constellations. To the immediate left of our sky, we had a giant fir tree blocking off the entire western arm of the galaxy, which is a bit of a bummer. But from the tree to the right, I was able to show them the asterism Teapot, behind which was the middle of our galaxy. So I was able to talk a little bit about the weird ass things that we found, that we were finding in there and discovering our black hole. To its right was Scorpius with bright red Antares at its heart, our 15th brightest star in the sky. It's kind of a theme. They have a lot of the brightest stars, which makes me totally envious of them. Then to its right is Centaurus, of course, with its two bright hooves that I was just talking about. Then following it, Argo Navis. I know that this has been officially broken down into 3 smaller constellations, but I can't find those constellations. I can find Argo Navis, and Argo Navis was made popular by Hollywood, Jason and the Argonauts. And so pointing it out to people, they're better able to remember it and find it and be able to relate to it. And of course, it has our second brightest star at its waterline, Canopus. And for some reason, it's chasing my favorite constellation across the sky, Canis Major. Imagine that. With on its collar the brightest star in the sky, Sirius, my favorite. Surprised? No. So there. Any guesses? This is that target list, carefully handwritten out in the middle of a dark sky sanctuary at night. Don't make that mistake. once I found a way to illuminate that, I was able to go onto the real dark sky objects. And I started with the jewel box, which is immediately to the left of the Southern Cross. And this is the picture I was able to take with my go-to telescope. Not as good as something you would find on the internet, but it was live and they were able to watch it for them in real time. And I was able to use it to talk about open star clusters and where they come from and where they're going to and everything I could remember about them at the time. Nicely let us segue into the butterfly cluster over near Scorpio, which is another one. Oh, yeah, the butterfly cluster. And we had a nice hearty talk about whether this actually looked like a butterfly or not. I thought it did. Some of them didn't think so, but your mileage may vary. From there, we went to the back of the Centaur. Holding on for dear life, I assume, is a Mega Centauri, the globular cluster. I love globular clusters. They are my favorite objects in the sky. They're just like big, beautiful jewel boxes. And I always dream that if I find pirate treasure and open up the chest, there'll be a globular cluster inside, which might be a little awkward, but that's the fantasy. And so I was able to talk about them and the mysteries of where they came from and some of the questions we have and a little bit that we know about them. And so that was fun. And so I went right from there to the spider globular cluster, which is a little smaller, but still, I think, very, very beautiful. Then on from there to the wake of the Argo Navis is the Carina Nebula. I couldn't get the best picture of nebula in with the telescope, which really disappointed me because nebula, of course, is the most beautiful, colorful things in our sky. And it's part of what pulled me into astronomy to begin with, way back in the 80s or 90s when I got started with it because of the big, beautiful, colorful things that really caught my attention. And unfortunately, at the time, I couldn't find any other nebula in the sky to show them. And that was probably because my skills at the time at finding targets weren't the very best. So we were kind of stuck with that, but it still sparked conversation. And I was able to talk about the different kinds of nebula and where they come from and the different kinds that things that they do. So it was good enough. And of course, low down on the horizon to the south were the large and small Magellanic clouds that had gone there to see. Turns out 25 degrees south latitude isn't really far south enough to get a great overhead view of them. But, and that's why I don't have my own pictures of them. This one is from the internet. But I still got to see them with my own eyes. And so I fulfilled my goal. It was their photons, my retinas, with only some glasses in between. So that worked great. And I loved their questions because they came throughout and it showed me that they were listening and interested and engaged and wanted to learn more, which felt nice. And they asked things like, what is in the middle of our galaxy? And what is a black hole? I was honored to be the first person to be able to explain to some of them what a black hole was. I hadn't even thought about, some people don't know what black holes are. That's how into astronomy my head is. They're the ones who asked me what a nebula was, which started me off on the whole conversation with different kinds. And one of them asked me a question that actually stumped me, and I had to look up. He pointed to a part of the sky and said, which star is that? Is that Castor or Pollux? I had to use my phone to answer that one. It's like, okay, needed to study a little bit more. So that was the event itself. But before the event, I had thought about, well, I'm going to go there. I'm going to tell them about this guy, that maybe things they've not known before. Maybe they're going to be interested, and maybe they're going to want to learn some more on their own. So I thought about, what can I bring them to help them do that if they're interested in that? So I put some things together on a memory stick with the installation files for the desktop version of Stellarium. Their internet there is so slow that it would have taken them at least several hours, probably several days, to download those installation files, because there's so much data there. On this island, they do not watch YouTube. The internet connection is so slow that that is just not a thing that they can do there. Similarly, I had downloaded to my phone the four of the more popular sky identification apps and practiced with them on my own so that I could recommend them and help teach them how to use it. So, and people did ask, and I was able to, for some, I just installed it for them. And then I was able to help them learn how to use it. So I was glad that I prepared in that way. I put together a handout to show for Astronomers Without Borders because it's a free membership. And there's no question they could have that if they ask it on the in the forums of Astronomers Without Borders, they're not going to get some great answers to learn anything that they want at any level that they want to learn it. So that was really handy. And for the community, I had also brought some gifts, which I'm here presenting to Mayor Simon Young, a really nice guy. And those gifts were some books for their library and for their school. This is the Astronomy Handbook. Both of those y'all probably recognize because they're from RASC. And the free spectrographs that I got when I joined Astronomers Without Borders. I love spectrographs, and I regret not keeping just one for myself. But I gave it all to them so that they would have them, because they're really cool. And at a bigger level, I thought about what if this happens to get them interested in growing their own astrotourism offering. And so with that in mind, I reached out to several global astronomy organizations, explaining the situation with Pitcairn, explaining what I was going to be doing. And I found a number of people in those organizations who were willing to help Pitcairn jumpstart their astrotourism if anyone on Pitcairn was actually interested in doing so. And I found people here in RASC, which was Charles, of course. There were people in Astronomers Without Borders. There were people in the Royal Astronomical Society, the one in the UK, because of course they are a UK territory. So I figured that would make sense. But I also found people in the very verbosely named International Astronomical Union's Office of Astronomy Outreach. Not very succinct, but it was the right place to go. So just, I know. I saw that. And then when I was creating the slide, and I was going, E-I-E-I-O. Yeah, I wish they practiced succinctness a little bit more, but they did great stuff. So I'm not going to complain too much about them. And also to the same end, I donated to them a few hundred of their dollars to get the astrotourism started. Because who knows, it might actually go somewhere. And I had a great time doing this. I just had the adventure of my life. And it was really nice afterwards when I was thinking, well, I don't know if anyone else was interested, but I had a great time. And a few weeks later, I got a letter from the mayor himself thanking me for what I had done, for the donation, for the event itself. And it was, that really meant a lot to me to see that someone on the other end appreciated this. I was very happy with the whole thing. I would have been fine if I was the only one who had fun, but to see that someone else did just really made it that much more special to me. So that was my fun escapade, going to meet the descendants of the mutineers and saying, hey, this thing above you, look at all the neat things there in it. So with that, are there any questions? Yes. Oh. Yes.
Is someone insulated from all the chatter we get here in case of the quicker than the dark, or are we still exposed to that?
They can do the things that don't require high-speed internet. So Facebook is fine. Live streaming videos are not. But I don't know how much they reach out for that. The older generation certainly isn't interested. But I think the younger generation are interested. So It's an option for them if they want to pursue it, but it's certainly not like living in the middle of a city with fiber optic.
You was there, what's okay there with that internet connection?
It did pose problems. Yeah, it did pose its problems, but again, that was another thing I thought about in advance, and so I tried to have everything downloaded that I might need. And every at the end of every day, I downloaded the photos off my camera into my computer, so there'd be one backup place, and in case I dropped my phone over the side of the boat or something. So I was keeping that in mind too. So I was working around it. It was very strange, no cellular on that island. So you're used to whipping out your cell phone and finding your GPS and the local weather report. No, none of that. You got internet connection when you were near one of the houses, but on the south side of the island where my event was, there were no nearby houses. So none of that at all. Pain in the butt, but still worth everything that we got out of it instead. Yes.
I thought Starlink covering all that on it.
Yes. They have Starlink, and they also have the other one whose name I can't think of right at the moment. The governmental offices use one of those, and the rest of the citizens use one of the other ones. When I was visiting there, one of them was broken for whatever reason. And they were all having to use just the one. I think they were all having to use Starlink. But Starlink is not fast. Starlink is not fast at all. So anything like the fellow Sid that I was visiting, when I was coordinating with him beforehand, he'd tell me sometimes he would write email and send it, and it would sit in his inbox or it'd sit in his outbox trying to send for 2 days. The population of Pitcairn get most of their income from stuff they sell to tourists. And that's only half of the year. I was in the winter when the ships weren't coming near the island so that visitors from the ship come in and see all the wares that the Pitcairners had created. But that's how they make almost all of their money. So $170 a month is not an option for most of the population there. So yeah, just all low budget stuff. Yes.
When you shop with Equator,
Mm-hmm.
you would capture all us, which one which.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find it like the northern sky?
Mm-hmm.
If you go south of the equator, it's reversed.
It is.
And nothing looks the same.
That's true.
Everything angles are flipped.
Everything's upside down. It was fun looking to the north from there because again, I was only 25 degrees south, so I could see most of the northern stuff. I could see half of the Big Dipper. The Little Dipper was not there at all. Leo was upside down on its head, and like, okay, that's interesting. And everything else was upside down, and I was having to try to reorient my mental maps of the sky to what I was seeing on it, and then connect them all into what I could see down there and the rest of the southern sky. So that did take a little bit of getting used to. I've read somewhere that if you lay on your back on the ground and look up from there, it doesn't look upside down at that point, but I didn't think to try that there.
And that's for flat earthers.
There are many things that I could speculate about the flat earthers, but I feel they're probably off topic of this particular talk.
We're running in the election here, right?
Yeah, that falls into things I'm not going to talk about the flat earthers. So yeah, let's stay politically correct and not let myself go insane. Mm-hmm. I chose to stay 10 nights there. The same boat, the Silver Supporter, goes back and forth between the Gambier Islands and Pitcairn. It's the only one, so God help them if anything happens to it. And it makes one full rotation in a week. So you can either stay 3 nights or some multiple of 7 nights in addition to that, unless you provide your own transportation. So it was 3 nights or 10 nights or 17 nights, et cetera, et cetera. Since I had a husband back home, I decided only to make it 10 instead of 17, like I really would have liked to have done. But I was intentionally stacking the deck in my favor, so I could see 3 rainy nights in a row, but probably not 10 rainy nights in a row. And in fact, most of the nights I got lucky. Most of the nights were clear, or it would split up half and half, or whatnot. I actually did 2 of the events. I just kind of threw them together for purposes of presentation. But on the second one, that one stopped a little bit early because the clouds hadn't come in, and couldn't see any more of the sky. So I could still answer questions, but I couldn't point things out anymore. And occasionally there'd be a gap and say, "Oh, look, there's this thing or that or the other."
Is it seasonal? Like, is there not in the season?
No, I don't think so, because it is an island, and so of course the ocean all around you, you get plenty of rains and storms and whatnot. Droughts are very rare there. I know of one that happened that was really bad for them, but it just usually it's a subtropical island, so plenty of rain pretty regularly. So you just factor that into your plans.
One of the disappointments of living in Portland what to say is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now you're down to say
Oh yes, yes.
And we give you like a different
Oh boy, howdy! If I can get to the right slide. I meant to say this when I was going through it. Yeah, so that was basically the south sky. We were on the top of the cliff, not too close to the edge, looking towards the South Pole, and it was the fir tree, and that was the sky looking off pretty far to the right. And it was up middle in center of our view. It's just the best view I've ever had of the galactic disk at all. Nothing like seeing it up here, because even if it was higher in our sky, we've got so much light pollution that wasn't there. You could see the carpet of stars going across the galactic arm, even without the binoculars. I mentioned the jewel box earlier. I tried to find the jewel box with binoculars because I knew to look just to the left of the Southern Cross. And I looked, and there were so many stars there. I couldn't tell if I was looking at the jewel box or not, because I didn't know which stars I was looking at. Were they part of the open cluster or weren't they? I had no idea. And so instead, I just kind of scanned my binoculars across the galactic disk, and it was just this nonstop carpet of just beautiful, beautiful stars, and I could not get enough of that.
the impression is very blue.
Mm-hmm. The blue is. Mm-hmm. It was, yeah, well, it's because the retina's perception of color is different than a camera's. Our refresh rate is so much faster than a camera's, and we can't stop that. Whereas you can set a camera to long delay, and you can stack images from the camera to get the colors come out. This has more color than we could actually see. You could see some yellow in the galactic bulge. You could really see the dark clouds in front of the stars, and that's something you can't really see from up here. But except for the scintillating sharp red ones, which really stood out beautifully. I mean, they were almost piercing. They were so bright and sharp. It was really mostly just the red ones and what might be blue or might be white stars. Like you could see Rigel, but it doesn't look perceptually different, even though you know it's a blue star if you look at it through a camera.
Did you see a magazine too behind?
I didn't know how to look at that actually. At the time, I'm still relatively new as an amateur astronomer, and so doing this trip when I did was a real strange thing to decide to do, actually, because I knew so little, but doing it helped me learn so much. So at the time, the things that my telescope was pointing out, I didn't actually know how to find myself if I was looking for it with binoculars or if I were manually controlling a telescope. The jewel box, I knew where to look and still couldn't find it. And the others, I was relying on the telescope to know and let it figure it out and to show them the pictures from that. So I was kind of cheating a little bit, but it was outreach and I was just trying to get their interest. And so I was at least qualified to do that. Any others?
The residents there, of course, are seeing the sky 5 nights out of every week.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of wonder, why would somebody come from
Yes.
the north to tell us about something that we've been looking at for 200 years?
I got the impression that that's exactly what they were wondering. They grew up with it and they probably don't think anything more about that. And people live in a country thinking about clean air, who's never experienced smog or whatnot in a downtown before. And so it just, and even though they come from two cultures, I didn't get the sense that any of the original Polynesian, Tahitian stories or any of the original British stories of the sky had lasted there, because most places have their own ancient histories of the skies and all the stories they tell, and they had absolutely nothing, at least as far as I could tell. So yeah, I think they just didn't bother thinking about it at all. They just didn't know. What a great problem to have, though. I mean, it's just your sky so beautiful all the time that, gosh, you mean it's not this way everywhere else in the planet? So I was hoping I could get their interest into some deeper stuff on that. So if the mayor's letter is any indicator, I may have been a little bit successful at it. So, yep.
You say you or
as far as I could tell, they did not. Right. Right.
Did they identify the southern cross?
Not to my knowledge. All the questions were about there was no swapping of information like I had kind of anticipated beforehand, because I thought there would be those stories, but there wasn't. So maybe they'll think a little bit more about it now. I hope. Yeah. 50, yep. Approaching, but not quite 50. And at any one time, a lot of them are off the island, because to go to a dentist, they have to take a 2-boat ride or a 2-night ride on the boat just to get to a dentist. They have a medical clinic there that's open 3 days a week, and that's it. And it's not even open 3 full days a week. It's 3 half days a week. I met the 2 doctors who was there. I was like, wow, y'all must have great lives. You like to work 3 half days a week. And I was kind of laughing at them for that. but it really was a nice situation for them. So anything major, like one of them I was in contact with later, and he had done something to cut a tendon, and there was nothing there on the island for the immediate help. He was having to go to Australia or New Zealand to get that taken care of. One of the residents I had wanted to meet that I had heard about, he was off island for medical reasons, something to do with his jaw. But he had to be gone for that 6 months, just because he had to keep going back for treatments. It didn't make sense for him to keep going back to the island. So there's only usually about 2/3 of their permanent residency on the island. At the time I was there were none.
None?
0. There were, they have a monthly newsletter, and I subscribed to it beforehand and read the year's worth before my trip. And so there had been 3 girls right before I got there. And so I was following the newsletter, the progress of the school, and I knew about the projects they had done. And I was excited to meet them. And when I get there, it's like, they went off to Australia to school. When I got there, they had like just left. I wanted to meet them. Those were the only young girls, young children on the thing. There were some teenagers, older teenagers, like practically adults, but that was it. A lot of the kids don't stay. A lot of the kids understandably find it boring, and they go off to school and look at all the other neat things that the world has to offer. so much. This was a delight to come out and talk about this. It's fun putting these talks together. It's like the third one that I've done now, because every single time I go back to my original notes and diaries and pour through the data again to see if there's anything extra, and I get to relive the trip every single time. And that's just a marvelous thing. And so thank you all so much for giving me that opportunity.
Thank you very much. Thank you.